Welcome to Gong Labs Live, episode 15. That's right, we're celebrating our quinceañera this week. I'm your host, Devin Reed. Now, you know what it is. Every week, we're breaking down tips, tricks, and insights to help you as a revenue professional be as effective as possible. Maybe that's set another meeting, close one more deal, build one more better enablement plan, whatever it is. Now, thank you to the Gong Tribe, folks that are recurring visitors, you're watching every week, committed to getting 1% better. This is for you. And if you're brand new, just checking it out for the first time, welcome. We're glad that you tuned in. Go ahead and tag a friend in revenue. Make sure that they're in on the goodness as well. Go ahead and tag them right now. We're also starting an email subscription list that will give you an optional calendar invite, so you can put it on for Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, every single time that we go live. And you'll also get added to the email, so you'll see upcoming interviews we have going on and updates every time content gets added to on demand. Now, if you're not already, make sure that you click follow on Gong's LinkedIn page. Now over to Chris for quick tips for closers.
When you're trying to persuade a buyer, there are two modes of operation that you can take. One is attracting them, and the other is promoting to them, okay? And they're very different modes of operation. Promoting is what most people do. They are actively forcing benefits, sales arguments, and different stuff like that. And the result is the buyer usually wells up sales resistance, okay? It's almost they can feel it at a physical level. Attracting versus promoting is a totally different paradigm of persuading another person. It is guiding them to come to their own self-discovery that they need or want whatever it is you're selling. And there are two great ways to keep yourself in this attracting paradigm. So number one is telling stories. When you tell stories of other customers you've had that are maybe going through the same problems that the prospect is going through, the prospect comes to their own self-discovery that they're dealing with the same pain point and maybe they need what it is you're selling. The second way to keep yourself in an attracting paradigm of persuasion is by asking questions about their problems, but even more importantly, about the implications and consequences of those problems. When you ask questions and you get the buyer or the customer to voice the pain and the implications and the consequences on their own, they come to their own self-discovery and you're attracting them rather than promoting to them.
All right, well, we are joined by Alex Vasan, who is the #1 sales rep at Gong, and at least the very first sales hire. We can argue who's at the top of the leaderboard from quarter to quarter.
Maybe second.
Depending on where the quarters land. You'll also see him around social media from time to time in a golden jacket. That's because he was the very first sales rep to close $1 million here at Gong. Quite an accolade. So thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for that intro.
You got it. What we're going to cover today is the 3 different scenarios where friction is actually good for your sales conversations. A lot of times reps start to back away from friction. They start to feel it. They get timid. We're going to show you 3 ways where it's actually really good and how you can handle that awkwardness to make sure that you come out on top. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So before we dive into kind of the hows, what do you mean exactly by friction on your sales call? So everyone knows we're kind of on the same page here.
Yeah, so the best way I can describe it is early on in my career, whenever I would talk to a prospect, even if it was like a warm call, pre-scheduled call, and I felt like there was some tension on the line. Maybe they didn't exactly believe like what I was saying. Maybe they were hesitant to take next steps.
Yeah.
Maybe we were having a discussion to take a next step, and there was some friction there. Any kind of pushback initially, I always would take on as friction in the deal.
Sure.
And I was intimidated by it. I was scared actually. I thought that the call was not going well.
That's fair. I think that's fair. Especially for, when you're first starting out in sales, you just want everything to go as smoothly as possible. Reality hits you pretty quickly, usually on that first call. And it's kind of like, I'm going to have to do maybe it's objection handling, maybe it's just kind of handling those emotions when you get some pushback.
Yeah. The funny thing is like the more selling I do, the more I realize there's some personas in particular that actually the way they buy is by creating friction in the deal. Just to see one, your skills as a rep, and to see if you would be a good partner for them long term as well.
Right, absolutely. And why do you think sales reps avoid friction? At least that's my interpretation. I think they try to avoid it, or at least why do you think they're off put by it?
It's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make you feel good. It's a different feeling than being hung up on a cold call completely. But it makes you feel like you're not doing your job well, I think, at the end of the day, especially if you can't see kind of the the forest through the trees. I hate that expression, but
Yeah.
if you can't see that it's not good friction, it makes you feel really uncomfortable and kind of doubting your skill set a little bit.
Got it. Well, that's what a lot of the episode today is about, is turning the framework, or maybe just the perception, right, of friction is bad and it should be avoided, and really friction is good and should be accepted.
Sure.
And how to handle it to succeed. So it sounds like friction is actually going to get you where you want to go. So is it safe to say that friction is actually a good thing? How much friction do you want in your conversations or in your deals? Is there kind of a healthy sweet spot?
I think there's a saying that some deals are too good to be true and reps get happy ears, and I'm a big believer in that. I think when everything seems to be good to be true, it usually is,
right.
And deals tend to fall through. So I think, to me, when I think of friction, it's almost like a qualifier of like, is this opportunity real?
Interesting.
There's always going to be, if you're multi-threading and you're talking to parties, there's always going to be someone who might even be a champion, but who is maybe not fully buying into your value proposition, or has experience with another vendor and doubts that you're better than them, or just in general has had a bad experience with your company.
Yeah. You said something that was interesting. If a deal's too good to be true, when you get one of those, right, it's too smooth, nothing's bad's happened, what do you do? Do you try to find friction? Do you try to find the unknown, maybe objection that's hiding out?
Yeah, my favorite question to ask in those types of scenarios is, hey, we've had one call, we've had one email, and you're telling me you're ready to buy. It's never happened to me before.
Yeah. So you're telling them it's too good to be true.
So why would this be the first time? Yeah, why would this be the first time that this happens on this freak opportunity? And almost have them kind of sell me on why this deal is real.
Right, yeah. What are the responses that you get a lot?
I think some people are put back on it because a lot of reps don't ask them that.
Yeah.
A lot of the responses I get is, somewhere along the lines of like, well, we're familiar with this, we want to use it, we understand the ROI. And I'm like, well, hey, Gong, 90% of our customers buy via pilot. And so immediately I would push back and say, hey, look, I don't know why you wouldn't take the opportunity to trial the software without committing, 40, 50K of your spend.
Interesting. So you're kind of saying like, hey, hold up for a little bit. Let's go through this the right way. Let's not try to cut corners here. And I'm sure they probably appreciate that a little bit, right? Like a sales rep not going for the fastest deal possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it still could be fast. It just doesn't have to be 24, 48 hours fast. It could be like a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Interesting. Last thing before we kind of dive into it, you said something, there's friction and then skepticism.
Yeah.
I think skepticism is a form of friction potentially. What do you think the differences are between those two?
Yeah, I think skeptics are great. I think skeptics can also be intimidating because they're pushing back on your value proposition. They generally actually are fairly direct because they'll be like, no, that doesn't resonate with me at all. Let's move on to something else. But I think they're engaged because they're actually responding to whatever you're pitching, and they're putting into doubt. So I'd way rather talk to a skeptic to somebody who's got my talk up to 85% and it's just saying, oh yeah, everything sounds great, because I'm not sure if they're even paying attention to the call or if they're just being nice for the sake of getting off the phone faster. Right.
Yeah, that's funny. One of the funny objections I got, I think it's someone who probably was a skeptic, or wasn't a skeptic, but trying to become one or throw something at you, is the have you ever been asked, what's the biggest objection you run into?
Yeah.
What do you answer to that? Or how do you answer if you don't want to necessarily give away the objection that you hear? But
what's the biggest objection that I get? Well, it depends, right? In the beginning of Gong, it used to be when we were still just educating the market on that this kind of technology exists. It was like, well, does it actually work the same way you're telling me it does?
Right. And seems too good to be true.
Seems to be good to be true. That was honestly the biggest objection, was like, seems too good to be true. I'm not sure that it's there. And we would take people down the experience of like, hey, well, we actually let you try it and see it for yourself.
Right.
Trying to think now. I think the biggest objection maybe is around adoption. It's hard to get my reps to do anything. Why would they do this?
Sure.
And I think the way I handle that is actually by educating them a little bit, by saying, hey, did you know that reps are actually the biggest users of our platform?
Right. So changing the perception of it.
Changing the perception. So whatever that objection might be, if you have a good story that's authentic and real, to actually throw it back at them and say, actually, that concern you bring up, everyone has that concern.
Yeah.
And the way we handle it is the following.
I like it. Okay, so let's get into some of the friction itself.
Yep.
When in the sales conversation or deal, we'll kind of play with both. When does it typically happen? When do you feel the friction the most?
It really depends. It could be the initial call, like it could be a cold call. I think there's tons of friction in cold calls in general. It's hard to sometimes identify where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I think on the initial discovery meeting or demo, it can pop up as well. And I think it definitely happens a lot towards the end of the sales cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's break those apart. I think on the cold call, I think friction is kind of the name of the game.
Yeah.
You're calling someone unannounced, and they don't usually know who you are.
Yeah.
So I would say accepting that friction is probably key, right?
No way
if
to
you're
get
going to
around
pick
it.
up the phone, if you're going to pick up the phone, accept that friction is on the other line. Hopefully, it's just able to be overcome. On those first calls, let's call it discovery call, maybe into a demo, right? Maybe someone's like, hey, I kind of get what you're doing with this, during the discovery call, but like, I want to see it to believe it. Is that where the skepticism comes in?
Yeah, I think there's skepticism there. In my experience, is usually generally around whatever ROI that you're pitching around your solution is. Can it be applied to my business and my team? That's the first type of skepticism. And then the second type of skepticism, and this is almost like doubt friction is what I would call this, is, well, do I really need to deploy this now? Or is this something I can put onto the back burner? Okay. And this is, to me, where you can really separate yourself from the rest of the pack, is when you can start to create urgency around why someone needs a solution.
Right.
When they're creating friction around saying, hey, Devin, I hear what you're saying. This sounds great, but I can't use this for another 6 to 7 months.
Got it.
And I think that's where you can take that pushback, and usually a lot of reps will kind of, shrink back in their seat and be like, oh, they don't want what we're selling, and follow up with them in 6, 7 months. And some of the more seasoned reps will actually push back on that and try to turn that around and get some next steps, perhaps earlier than the prospect would have liked to, even if they were in the cycle on their own.
Yeah, you had a big deal recently. I won't drop names, but you had one where they told you 6 months from now this is a deal, and I think you got it in right at the end of last quarter.
Yep.
Yeah. So it is doable. And I think you touched on it again. There seems to be a theme coming out, which is the concept is not to avoid the friction, but probably to actually play ball, maybe add a little friction to it, or at least kind of let that play out. Like you said, hey, if it's not ready now, give us 7 months. A lot of reps will shrink back and avoid that friction, maybe try to find a smoother avenue in a different deal, versus kind of playing out that friction, asking a couple of questions, and seeing if there's a way you can drive everything.
Yeah, challenger sale plays right into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. A big challenger sale fan. Okay, so that's the first one. So discovery, early skepticism. The second one is deal navigation. Now, deal navigation is from, I would argue, the first contact, or at least the first call, all the way to close, right? So you're navigating multiple things. It could be navigating people, steps in your sales process, different objections. In your opinion, where does this friction land most when you're trying to navigate a deal?
I think it's when you're trying to push on your champion or try to push on your executive sponsor to do things at the company. A lot of the times you actually have buy-in in the organization. Let's say you're a later stage in a sales cycle and there's already a VP of sales that wants to buy your solution and a CFO that's on board, but you have a technical and operations team that needs to prioritize something.
Right.
And I think creating friction there by having your champions or your executive sponsors come over the top and saying, hey, actually, we need to do this now, is a very, very good place to create friction. Because one is you'll find out how good your champions really are.
Right. Yeah, you will. How much are they really willing to go internally and go to bat for you versus just kind of being a lip service.
Right. And I think something we talked about earlier, when deals tend to be too good to be true, you don't actually have a champion, you don't actually have an executive that's going to go to bat for you. And they fall apart a lot of the times because when it comes to actually implementing the solution or getting the line of business to use it, it happens so fast and people haven't talked about it internally.
Right.
You haven't kind of rubbed shoulders with everyone at the company, and it's really hard to get some business done.
It sounds like you can use friction to see if you have a coach versus a champion.
Yeah.
Because a coach will be on that first call and say, hey, this looks great. I'm going to run it by you know who and whoever else needs to be involved. We've got a deal here. But a champion will actually, you can press them a little bit on that and they'll show you some evidence, right? Of like, no, here's the CFO. I'm actually going to put you in a meeting with her. Or, let me go to our VP and put some pressure on this operations person who might be slowing down our prioritization.
Yeah. And I think also, giving them tasks to complete.
Yeah.
This is going to be a weird one, but if you can give tasks that are not necessarily critical to getting the deal done, but if you can give your champion a task just to see if they can help you with it.
Sure.
Like,
what are a couple examples of that maybe?
I don't know if this applies to everyone that watches the show, but if you're selling into different departments and you want an introduction to a department, it's not necessarily critical to getting the deal done with Department X, but just to see if they're even willing to do that.
Got it. Okay.
Be like, hey, I want to, I'm selling to the finance team, but I actually want an introduction to the operations team. Are you okay doing that?
Yeah.
No. It's not for this exact deal, but I just want to see if there'd be a fit there.
Got it. Okay. So seeing if they're willing to reciprocate some sort of ask, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Why not? I mean,
cool.
there might be an opportunity down the road for you to work with that company or that team as well. Yeah.
Got it. All right, so we've covered early stage skepticism. We're navigating deals, asking the tough questions. The last one is, of course, probably the most frictionful, if there was such a thing, such a word, is the closing motion.
Yeah. There
can be a lot of friction on that. When you're in your closing motion, closing call, what are like the highest like reasons for friction? Where is it coming from?
Price or price to value probably would be one.
Would you place ROI in that, by the way? Is that a separate one to you? I view it as a separate thing. We can kind of get to that.
Price to value, ROI, I'd probably put them the same.
Okay.
I think another one would be timing. So
why now?
You're in a closing motion. You think they're going to buy now because you're now starting to talk money and buying process. But I think the card that the customer will always play to create some friction is to be like, well, we don't have to do this.
Oh, of course, yeah. It's kind of like removing themselves, so you chase them a little bit.
Yes.
Like, yeah, this looks great and everyone likes it, but there's no reason to move before 2020.
Yep. So, and then timing can also be, existing priorities. So timing could be a real thing where even if you negotiate commercials and legal, but they're just not going to implement for another, like to your point example earlier, 6 months.
So oftentimes people want to run from friction. If you're at the final, the final stages and pricing's there, you don't want to run from a pricing friction negotiation. What are some of the ways maybe that people can play along with that friction to their benefit, right? So to me, there's price, which is this is just too expensive, right? We hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And then maybe a second one you can touch on is ROI, which is how do I know I'm going to get my money back, right?
Yeah. I think, you definitely don't want to run away from it. You also don't want to fight friction with more friction. And I think the jerk reaction that a lot of reps will have, I used to do this too, is when somebody would push back, I would try to push on them. Mm-hmm. And I think you want to fight friction with a little empathy. So you want to earn and actually, even if you don't think it's a real concern coming from the customer, you want to make it seem like you're trying to understand where this friction is coming from. Mm-hmm. So if you're telling me, hey, the timing is not right, and be like, well, what, natural question is like, well, why do you think that? Or if you think the pricing is too high, well, help me understand why you think the pricing is too high. Mm-hmm. Instead of just being like, I don't understand. Pricing seemed good to you 2 weeks ago. Yeah. That would be the wrong way to do it.
Right, okay. So you want to finesse it a little bit. You don't want to just come back with a hard clap back, if you will.
I would immediately counter any friction you get with some empathy before you earn the right to then say, hey, I totally understand where you're coming from. Here's how other people have overcome X friction point in my experience.
Got it.
As opposed to just jumping right into it and making the situation from a situation that has some good friction to like a combative standoff.
Well, I think buyers are probably expecting that, right? Like you have your buyers who are like, hey, this is really just the budget I have, and so this is literally too expensive. Yep. And then you have the people that are like, it doesn't matter if I have 2x in my budget for what you're asking for. I'm going to tell you it's too expensive so we can do the negotiation dance.
Yes.
Right? And so I think it's key to ask some of these questions to kind of to add empathy to start to understand which one is which, right? Because I think if you think about it, buyers are probably expecting some like a sales rep to come back and not want to give me the discount, right? Both parties go into essentially expecting some sort of friction, but by having empathy first, I think their guard is probably down a little bit, right? Yeah. And then they're going to tell you, well, hey, I'm literally trying to get this thing through finance. I don't have budget.
Yeah, I think they expect the rep to make a premature concession of some sort,
right?
Especially if we're talking about negotiation, closing. That's all that is. A lot of the times, a lot of that friction is not real.
Yeah,
it's just a negotiation tactic.
Sure.
And the first thing I would do is almost like check the friction and say, hey, can I empathize with you? Is this a real situation? If I don't feel like the concern is coming from a place where it's an actual deal breaker for them, then I think it's okay to push back.
Sure.
But there might be in a lot of cases, a really good reason as to why the budget is not there or why the timing is not going to work out. And I would rather know that as well so I can help the customer along at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, and then the more you know from your prospect, the more you can go internally and make a case, right? When salespeople go and say, hey, this is the discount I need, if you actually know exactly what's going on in their business to justify it to your own business, you usually get less friction when you're trying to sell it internally.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything after the empathy? I mean, we kind of covered a little bit more. Is there any kind of specific tactics there?
No, I just don't be intimidated by friction from especially positions of power. I think if you're talking to a C-level executive or the decision maker in your deal, they will probably bring more friction than in some cases than anybody else to the table. I think they play they play the game of kind of, in some cases, bullying reps with creating friction and getting them to do things that they naturally wouldn't do.
Right.
But just don't get intimidated by the fact that you're talking to somebody in a position of power. Still have empathy. Try to diffuse the friction that they're bringing to the table before you really push back. I think the fastest way to have a deal breakdown is to not earn the right to push back on the friction that a C-level executive is making by not really understanding where it's coming from.
Right. Well, as you said first, if you start to understand, if you combat too quickly, people get defensive.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to be empathetic. We had talked offline right before the show too that really an objection late in your deal is usually a good thing. It's usually a buying signal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do some of those objections look like? So people in the audience can know, hey, I heard this. It might actually be a good thing according to Vasan on the daily or the weekly sales show.
Well, I always think about it, if you're getting objections late in the sales cycle, the positive of that is they're still talking to you.
That is good. That is good. That is
so
good.
I'd rather always have somebody talk to me, and hyper communication is best. So if I'm getting a lot of objections come up late in the sales cycle, to me, that's great. That's a lot of opportunities for me to get in front of the customer and handle those. And yeah, they're stressful in some cases, but hey, we're talking. The opposite of that is somebody going dark on you.
Sure. The worst.
What were some ways I would handle that?
Some of the last minute objections that you might hear that are actually a good thing. I think my mind jumps to payment terms, but that's like the last of the good ones. I would say that's usually kind of the last one.
Yeah, payment terms, something coming up with legal, something from security, something kind of out of left field that you haven't experienced before, or another one would be like, hey, we actually want to buy more product than we budgeted for. Can you give us this insane pricing discount?
That's not too bad either, right? You want more for less, but at least you want more at least.
Honestly, I can't say that anything super, super late stage has ever derailed a deal.
So you're basically saying anything pretty late stage objections is a good thing. They're talking to you. They're interested, right? They're trying to make the last kind of details work out, and then you probably have yourself a deal.
They're just trying to make asks until you tell them to stop most of the time.
That's usually how it works. Yeah. Ask usually receive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you have it. The 3 different scenarios to be on the lookout for when it comes to friction: early skepticism, demos and discovery calls, deal navigation, asking the tough questions. Don't be afraid to test your champion, and then of course the closing motion. You're going to run into some objections. And so remember, always lead with empathy. Ask clarifying questions, and don't run away from friction. Alex, thanks for being here, man.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Anytime.
There you have it for this week's episode. But as always, we have your sales meme of the week. You're in a meeting, then why did you answer the phone? I never understood that. Whenever I was making cold calls, someone picks up, says they're in the middle of a meeting. That never made sense. No one's ever in a meeting, picks up a cold call, but apparently it's true. Make sure you're following Gong on LinkedIn. And tomorrow, be on the lookout for a special edition, an aquatic version of Gong Labs Live. Our leadership took a crack at the episode. We'll let you decide who came out on top. We'll see you next week at 10 a.m. Pacific. See you then.